Somewhere right now, there is a version of you that already made the decision. A version of you that stopped waiting for permission, stopped waiting for the right mood, the right moment, the right amount of money, the right amount of courage, and simply moved. That version of you is living a life you have only imagined in the quiet seconds before sleep, in the daydreams you talk yourself out of before breakfast, in the plans you have written on napkins and never opened again. That version of you exists. The only question is whether you will ever meet him, because right now, today, in this very moment, you are standing at the exact fork in the road where every person who ever built something extraordinary once stood. Tired, uncertain, surrounded by people who love them but do not understand them, carrying a dream that feels too big for the body it lives in. And here is the truth nobody tells you gently enough: your old life will not let you go easily. It will not release you with a smile and a wave. It will fight for you. It will remind you of your excuses, whisper your fears back to you in your own voice, and offer you comfort in exchange for your future. That is what an old life does. It does not attack you with cruelty. It seduces you with familiarity. And familiarity, more than fear, is the real enemy of change. Think about every person you have ever admired from a distance. The ones who built something out of nothing, who walked away from safety into uncertainty, who looked ordinary one day and became unforgettable the next. None of them changed because life became easy. They changed because they made a decision so total, so complete, that turning back became more painful than moving forward. They forced themselves to change, not gently, not gradually, not by hoping circumstances would improve on their own. They made a decision in a single moment, and that decision cut every rope tying them to the person they used to be. This is the part of transformation nobody puts in inspirational posters. Change is not soft. Change is not a warm blanket. Change is a fire, and fire does not ask what you are ready to lose. It simply burns, and what survives the fire is who you become. So let me ask you something honestly, the way a friend would ask you at 2 in the morning when the noise of the day has finally gone quiet. What is the old life you are still dragging behind you? Is it a job that pays the bills but starves your spirit? Is it a group of friends who mock your ambitions because your ambitions remind them of the ones they buried? Is it a version of yourself you built as a teenager out of fear and never bothered to update? Is it the belief, planted so long ago you forgot it was ever planted, that people like you do not get to have the life you actually want? Whatever it is, hear this clearly. It will follow you everywhere you go, unless you make the decision to force yourself into a different life entirely. Geography does not create change. A new city, a new job, a new relationship, none of these things transform you if you carry the same mind into them. The old life is not a place. The old life is a pattern. And patterns do not dissolve because you moved 400 miles away. Patterns dissolve because you decided with total finality that you refuse to live inside them one more day. There is a story, one that repeats itself across every generation, about two travelers who set out to conquer new territory. One of them kept his ships anchored just off the shore, telling himself that if things did not work out, he could always retreat to where he came from. The other burned his ships the moment he landed, leaving his men with a single brutal choice: conquer or perish. There was no third option, no safety net, no old life to run back to. And history remembers which of these two men achieved what seemed impossible. It was not the one with the escape route. It was the one who removed every possibility of retreat, because when retreat is impossible, the mind stops wasting energy negotiating with fear and starts directing all of its power toward the only path left, forward. This is not a story about ships. This is a story about you. Because right now, somewhere in your life, there is a ship anchored just off the shore of your comfort zone, waiting for you, tempting you, promising you that if your dream does not work out, you can always go back to what you know. And as long as that ship is anchored there, you will never fully commit to the life you say you want. You will dabble in your dream. You will visit it on weekends. You will give it your leftover energy after everything else has taken what it needed. And leftover energy never built anything that lasted. Force yourself to change does not mean wait for motivation. Motivation is a mood, and moods are unreliable business partners. They show up when they feel like it and disappear exactly when you need them most. What actually changes a life is decision, a specific, dated, irreversible decision made once and then defended every single day against every version of yourself that wants to go back to sleep. Decision is the mother of achievement, and indecision is the slow, comfortable death of every dream that was ever whispered but never spoken aloud. Look at your own life honestly for a moment. How many things have you decided to do versus how many things have you merely considered doing? There is a canyon of difference between the two. Considering costs you nothing, and that is exactly why it produces nothing. Deciding costs you comfort, certainty, and the approval of people who like the old version of you better. But deciding is the only currency the universe accepts in exchange for a new life. Here is something that will feel uncomfortable, but discomfort is the price of truth. Every excuse you have built to protect yourself from changing, not enough time, not enough money, not enough support, not the right background, not the right connections. Every single one of those excuses has already been overcome by someone who started with less than you have right now. Somewhere on this planet, at this exact moment, a person with fewer resources than you, less education than you, worse circumstances than you, is building the exact life you have talked yourself out of pursuing. And they are doing it not because life handed them an advantage, but because they made a decision so absolute that circumstances became irrelevant. Circumstances do not build destinies. Decisions build destinies. Circumstances only decide how difficult the path will be, never whether it can be walked. Let's talk about the voice inside your head, because this is where the entire battle for your future is actually fought. Not in the world outside you, not in your bank account, not in your job title, in the quiet, constant, repetitive narration running through your mind from the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep. That voice has been trained by your childhood, by your failures, by people who meant well but planted limits inside you disguised as advice, by every rejection you ever experienced and interpreted as evidence of your own smallness. That voice has been repeating the same script for years, maybe decades. And here is the terrifying and liberating truth. Your mind cannot easily distinguish between a thought you deliberately choose and a thought that was planted in you by accident. It treats repetition as truth. Whatever you say to yourself again and again with emotion, your deeper mind will eventually accept as reality and begin working, silently, tirelessly, to make it so. This means the exhausted, defeated thoughts you have been repeating out of habit. I always mess this up. I'm not the type of person who succeeds. It's too late for me. People like me don't get lucky. These are not harmless complaints. They are instructions. And your mind has been faithfully following those instructions for years, building a life that matches the story you kept telling it. So if repetition builds belief, and belief builds behavior, and behavior builds destiny, then the starting point of forcing yourself to change is not your job, not your habits, not your environment. It is the sentence you repeat to yourself in the silence before you fall asleep and the silence right after you wake up. Those two windows of time are when your deeper mind is most impressionable, most open, most willing to accept new instructions. What are you feeding it? Are you feeding it fear dressed up as realism? Are you feeding it the tired old story of who you have always been? Or are you deliberately, consciously, forcefully feeding it the picture of the person you are choosing to become? Clearly, specifically with emotion, as if it has already happened? This is not wishful thinking. This is reprogramming. And reprogramming requires more discipline than most people are willing to give it, because it means catching yourself in the act of self-sabotage again and again, and choosing a different sentence every single time, even when the old sentence feels more true simply because it is more familiar. Now, let's address the 6 shadows that follow almost every person who ever tried to change their life, because if you do not name them, they will operate on you invisibly, and what operates on you invisibly cannot be defeated. The first shadow is the fear of poverty, the terror that if you leave the safety of what you know, you will end up with nothing. This fear convinces millions of people to stay in situations that are quietly destroying them, because at least those situations pay predictably. But ask yourself honestly, is financial safety worth a life you privately dread? Is a guaranteed small paycheck worth trading away the only life you will ever get? The second shadow is the fear of criticism, the fear of what people will say when you try something bold and it does not go perfectly, or worse, when it does. People will talk. People always talk. The people who talk the loudest about your ambition are almost always the people who buried their own. Their criticism is not information about you. It is a confession about them. The third shadow is the fear of ill health, which convinces people to avoid risk entirely, forgetting that a body kept safe but a spirit left to rot is not actually health at all. The fourth shadow is the fear of losing love. The fear that if you change, the people around you will not follow and you will end up alone. This fear is powerful because it touches something real. Change does cost relationships. Some people will not make the journey with you. But hear this clearly. A person who only loves the smaller version of you was never loving you at all. They were loving their comfort with you. The fifth shadow is the fear of old age, the quiet whisper that says you have already missed your window, that it is too late to start over. This fear lies more than any of the others because time does not run out the way fear tells you it does. What runs out is not time. What runs out is the willingness to try. And the sixth shadow, hiding beneath all the others, is the fear of death itself. Not necessarily literal death, but the fear of insignificance, the terror of living an entire life and leaving no mark, no evidence that you were ever truly here. This fear, faced honestly, is not your enemy. It is your fuel. It is the exact pressure that turns ordinary people into unforgettable ones, because they finally understood that the only thing more frightening than failing loudly is succeeding at nothing, quietly, for an entire lifetime. Every one of these fears will visit you the moment you commit to forcing yourself into a new life. They do not disappear because you became brave. Bravery was never the absence of fear. Bravery is walking directly into the version of your life you actually want, while every one of these shadows whispers that you should turn back. The people who changed their lives were not people who stopped being afraid. They were people who decided that their dream mattered more than their fear, and then acted accordingly, fear and all. Now let's talk about desire, because there is a difference between wanting something and burning for it, and that difference decides everything. Wanting is passive. Wanting sits on the couch of your mind and hopes conditions improve. Burning desire is different. Burning desire wakes you up at 5 in the morning without an alarm because your mind cannot stop working on the problem. Burning desire makes you willing to trade comfort, sleep, approval, and certainty for a chance. Not a guarantee, a chance at the life you actually want. Most people never achieve extraordinary change because their desire is lukewarm. They want a better life the way they want a better parking spot. Convenient if it happens, disappointing if it doesn't, but not worth restructuring their entire existence for. But the people who force real change into their lives, the people whose old lives could not follow them into their new ones, all share one trait: their desire crossed a threshold. It stopped being a preference and became a demand. It stopped whispering and started screaming. And once desire reaches that intensity, procrastination becomes almost physically painful, because every day spent not moving toward the dream begins to feel like betrayal. So ask yourself honestly, without performing the answer for anyone else's approval, do you actually want this new life, or do you merely like the idea of it? Because liking an idea requires nothing from you. Wanting a life with everything in you requires you to become someone capable of holding it. And that transformation from someone who likes an idea to someone who burns for a reality is the real beginning of forcing yourself to change. Let's talk about the people around you, because this part of the conversation makes people uncomfortable, and it should. You cannot build a new life while remaining in constant close contact with people who are deeply invested in your staying the same. This is not cruelty, it is physics. Energy behaves predictably. If you spend most of your hours surrounded by people whose ambitions have gone quiet, whose conversations circle endlessly around complaints, blame, and the safety of low expectations, you will absorb that atmosphere whether you intend to or not. Environment is not neutral. Environment is either lifting you or slowly, invisibly lowering the ceiling of what you believe is possible. This does not mean you abandon everyone who loves you. It means you become deliberate, ruthlessly deliberate, about who gets access to your dream while it is still fragile, while it is still young enough to be talked out of existence by a single careless comment from someone who never wanted anything badly enough to understand what wanting looks like. Surround yourself, even if only briefly, even if only through books, recordings, or the quiet study of people who have already done what you are trying to do, with minds that expand your sense of what is possible instead of shrinking it. This deliberate surrounding of yourself with expanding influences is not arrogance. It is architecture. You are building a mind capable of carrying a bigger life, and minds, like muscles, are shaped by what they are consistently exposed to. Here is something that will save you years of wasted effort. A life without a specific, clearly defined target is not actually being lived. It is simply being endured, one undirected day after another. Most people never change their lives, not because they lack ability, but because they never gave their ability a direction precise enough to aim at. Vague wishes produce vague results, or more often, no results at all. Force yourself to change requires you to get uncomfortably specific. Not someday I'll be successful, but this is exactly what I am building. This is exactly what it looks like when it is finished. This is exactly the date by which I intend to have taken the first real step. Specificity is not bureaucracy. Specificity is the difference between a wish and a plan, and only plans get executed. Because only plans can be acted upon today, in this hour, with the resources you already have. And once you have that target defended clearly in your own mind, understand this. You will not be given a plan that works perfectly on the first attempt. Nobody is. The people who built extraordinary lives were not people who never failed. They were people who failed, adjusted, failed again, adjusted again, and simply refused to accept failure as a final verdict on their worth or their future. This is the quality that separates those who force real change into their lives from those who talk about change forever without ever experiencing it. Persistence. Not blind stubbornness, but intelligent, repeated effort in the direction of a goal that refuses to be talked out of existing. Persistence looks unremarkable from the outside. It does not look like a single dramatic moment of courage. It looks like getting up one more time than you fell down quietly, without an audience, on the days when nobody would have blamed you for quitting. And this is precisely why so few people ever experience real transformation. Not because the formula is a secret, but because the formula is simple, and simple is not the same as easy. Getting up one more time, every single time, for months, sometimes years, while your old life keeps whispering that you should just go back to what was comfortable. That is the actual price of a new life, not talent, not luck. Persistence, applied relentlessly, in a specific direction over time. Let's talk about failure honestly, because most people have been taught to fear it as though it is a verdict, when in truth it has always been information. Every failure carries inside it a lesson precisely equal in size to the setback itself, but that lesson only reveals itself to people who are willing to look for it instead of collapsing into the identity of a person who fails. This is the difference between someone who fails once and quits and someone who fails 50 times and eventually builds something unstoppable. They interpreted the exact same event differently. One person said, "This proves I am not capable." The other person said, "This proves I have not yet found the method that works, and I am one attempt closer to finding it." Both people experienced the identical failure. Only one of them let it end the story. Consider for a moment how many people you have watched abandon a dream not because the dream was wrong, but because the timeline felt too slow, the resistance felt too heavy, and they mistook the natural difficulty of transformation for proof that they were not meant to succeed. This is one of the great tragedies of the human experience. Brilliant people, capable people, people carrying genuinely extraordinary futures inside them, quitting in the exact season right before their breakthrough, simply because they could not see how close they actually were. There is no visible marker in life that tells you, hold on, 3 more months and everything changes. There is no signpost. There is only the daily choice to keep going or to stop, made without evidence, made purely on the strength of decision and desire. And this is exactly why forcing yourself to change requires something deeper than motivation. It requires faith, not passive, hopeful faith, but active, working faith, the kind that keeps you building even when nothing around you confirms that the building is working. Now, here is where all of this becomes real instead of theoretical, because inspiration without action is simply entertainment. You have been given, across every sentence so far, the actual architecture of transformation, a decision so total it removes the option of retreat, a desire so intense it refuses to stay quiet, a mind reprogrammed through deliberate, repeated instruction instead of accidental, inherited fear, an honest confrontation with the shadows that have always tried to keep you small, a deliberate choice about who gets access to your dream while it is still young, a target specific enough to actually aim at, and a persistence that refuses to accept any single failure as the final chapter. None of this works as information. All of it only works as action. So the question is not whether you understood this. The question is what you do in the next 24 hours, because a new life is not built in some future moment when conditions finally feel right. It is built today, in the decision you make right now, in this exact hour, to stop waiting for permission that was never going to arrive and to start behaving immediately like the person you have decided to become. Think about the weight you have been carrying, the old identity, the old excuses, the old fears dressed up as wisdom, the old relationships that only make sense if you stay small, the old story about who you are and what you are allowed to want. That weight has a birthday. It was born the day you first believed it, and it has been repeating itself ever since simply because nobody ever interrupted it. You can interrupt it right now, not by waiting for a better mood, not by waiting for more information, not by waiting for someone else's approval, but by making the decision, the real decision, the kind that burns the ships, that this is the day your old life stops following you, because here is the final truth, the one that should either terrify you or set you completely free, depending on how you choose to receive it. Your old life cannot survive in the same space as your new decision. It cannot. The two are incompatible. The moment you truly decide, not consider, not hope, not wish, but decide, your old patterns begin losing their grip, not all at once, but steadily, the way morning light steadily replaces darkness without ever announcing the exact second the transition happened. You will not feel the change occur in one dramatic instant. You will simply notice, weeks or months from now, that the person who used to make excuses, who used to shrink from bold decisions, who used to let fear write the final word on every important choice, That person is gone, replaced quietly, day by day, by someone who kept showing up, even when showing up was the hardest, most uncomfortable, most unglamorous thing they had ever done. So force yourself, not gently, not eventually now. Force yourself to make the decision your comfort has been begging you to postpone. Force yourself to speak to yourself with the language of the person you are becoming instead of the person your fears convinced you that you are. Force yourself to walk away from rooms, relationships, and routines that only make sense for a smaller version of your future. Force yourself to get specific about what you are building instead of vague about what you wish would somehow happen. Force yourself to get back up the next time you fail, and the time after that, and every time after that, because persistence is not a personality trait reserved for special people. It is a decision available to anyone willing to make it, repeated daily until it becomes identity. Let's go deeper into the mechanism of the mind, because understanding why this works is what will keep you disciplined on the days when belief alone is not enough. Your imagination is not a decoration attached to your intelligence. It is the actual workshop where every invention, every business, every bold new life was first constructed, long before it ever became visible in the physical world. Nothing you can hold in your hands today was ever built without first being built in complete detail inside someone's imagination. The chair you sit in, the device you are hearing this through, the roads, the buildings, the systems that organize entire societies, every one of them existed as a picture in a mind before it existed as a fact in the world. This means your imagination is not idle daydreaming. It is the blueprint department of your future, and most people leave it unused, or worse, they let it run wild in the wrong direction, imagining failure in vivid detail while imagining success only in vague, half-hearted flashes. If you are going to force yourself to change, you must reverse this. You must spend deliberate time, daily, constructing the picture of your new life with the same intensity most people reserve for imagining disaster. See it specifically. See the room you will be working in. See the version of yourself who speaks with the calm confidence of someone who has already proven themselves capable. See the relationships, the freedom, the mornings that no longer begin with dread. The mind cannot pursue what it has never been shown clearly, so show it again and again until the picture becomes more familiar than the fear. Alongside imagination, you need specialized knowledge, not general information scattered across 100 unrelated interests, but deep, deliberate mastery of the exact skill your new life requires. This is where many people quietly sabotage their own transformation. They want the results of expertise without paying the price of study, of practice, of the long, unglamorous middle stretch where you are no longer a beginner but not yet impressive. There is no way around this stretch. Every person who eventually became remarkable in their field walked directly through the exact same unremarkable middle you are trying to avoid. The good news is that this stretch has an expiration date, but only for those who keep working through it. For those who quit inside it, it becomes permanent, and they spend the rest of their lives believing they simply were not talented enough, when the truth is they stopped paying the tuition one semester before graduation. Commit to becoming genuinely skilled, not just enthusiastic. Enthusiasm gets you started. Skill is what actually gets you paid, respected, and trusted with the life you are trying to build. None of this matters, however, without organized action, a plan translated into specific steps, attached to specific days, executed whether or not you feel inspired on any given morning. This is the point where most transformation attempts quietly die, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a slow erosion of daily discipline. The alarm goes off, and the old life offers just 5 more minutes. The task list includes the one uncomfortable action that would actually move the dream forward, and the mind finds 17 smaller, easier tasks to complete first, calling it productivity while it is actually avoidance wearing a disguise. Force yourself to change means you learn to recognize this disguise immediately. You learn to ask yourself, before checking anything else off your list, which one of these actions is the one I am most tempted to postpone, and then you do that one first every single day until postponing becomes the exception instead of the rule. Organized planning is not glamorous. Nobody applauds you for a well-structured Tuesday. But a well-structured Tuesday, repeated for months, becomes a transformed year, and a transformed year, repeated with discipline, becomes an unrecognizable decade. There is one more piece of this that deserves your full attention, because it is the part most people skip in their hurry to focus only on themselves. A life built entirely around personal gain, disconnected from any genuine value delivered to other people, tends to feel hollow even when it succeeds. The old life you are leaving behind was probably self-focused by necessity. Survival mode narrows your vision, and there is no shame in that. But the new life you are building should be anchored in something larger than your own comfort. Ask yourself what problem you are uniquely positioned to solve for someone else. Ask yourself who becomes better off because you finally forced yourself to change. This is not sentimental language added for effect. It is strategic. People, opportunities, and resources move naturally toward those who are visibly committed to creating value for others, and they quietly withdraw from those who are only ever asking what they can get. Build a life that serves, and the life that serves you back will follow almost automatically, not because the universe owes you anything, but because human beings are drawn, reliably and predictably, toward those who make their own lives better simply by being in the room. Understand also that transformation is rarely a straight line upward. There will be a week where everything clicks, where the new habits feel natural, where the old fears seem almost laughable in their smallness. And there will be a week, sometimes immediately after, where everything feels heavier than it did before you started, where the old life seems to reach back with surprising strength, offering you every reason to return to what was familiar. This is not evidence that you failed. This is simply what the process feels like from the inside, for every single person who has ever gone through it. The difference between those who complete the transformation and those who abandon it halfway is not that the successful ones never had the heavy week. It is that they had learned in advance to expect it, and so when it arrived, they recognized it for what it was, a test of the decision, not a verdict on the decision, and they kept moving anyway. Let me tell you something about time, because time is the one resource everyone treats as though it is infinite until suddenly one day it isn't. There is a particular kind of person who spends years preparing to prepare. They read every book on the subject, watch every video, take every course, gather every piece of information available, and somehow, despite all of that gathering, never actually begin. They call this being thorough. They call this being responsible. What it actually is, underneath the polite language, is fear wearing the costume of diligence. Preparation feels safe because it produces no results that can be judged. As long as you are still preparing, you cannot fail because you have not yet actually tried. But you also cannot succeed, and you cannot grow, and you cannot become the person your new life requires, because that person is only built through action, through the friction of actually attempting the thing and discovering, in real time, what you still need to learn. There will never be a moment when you feel completely ready. Readiness is not a feeling that arrives before action. Readiness is a feeling that is manufactured by action, built gradually, attempt by attempt, exactly like a muscle that only grows because it was placed under a resistance it had not yet adapted to. If you wait for readiness before you begin, you will wait forever, because readiness was never going to introduce itself first. Consider how much of your life has already passed waiting for the right moment to start, the right moment to leave, the right moment to speak up, to apply, to build, to walk away from something that stopped serving you long ago. How many of those right moments actually arrived exactly the way you imagined them? Very few, if any, because the right moment is not something that appears in the world. It is something you declare personally, unilaterally, without asking the world for its permission first. The people who force real change into their lives are not people who were handed a perfect moment. They are people who looked at an imperfect moment, one filled with uncertainty and risk and the very real possibility of failure, and declared it to be the moment anyway, simply because they had grown more tired of waiting than they were afraid of trying. There is a particular kind of grief that visits people late in life, and it has nothing to do with the mistakes they made. It has everything to do with the risks they never took, the versions of themselves they never allowed to exist, the dreams they quietly buried under the weight of practicality, and the opinions of people who will not be there to answer for the life you did not live. Nobody at the very end wishes they had stayed smaller for longer. Nobody wishes they had listened more closely to their fear. The regret that visits people is almost never about the actions that failed. It is about the actions that were never attempted at all, the ships that stayed anchored, the decisions that were postponed until postponement quietly became the decision itself. You do not want to become someone who explains decades from now all the reasons it made sense to wait. You want to become someone who, when asked how they built the life they are living, simply says, "I decided, and then I did not stop." Let's return to the voice inside your head one more time, because this deserves repetition. And repetition is exactly the tool that built the old voice in the first place. So repetition is exactly the tool that will build the new one. Every night before sleep, and every morning before the noise of the day begins, you have an open channel directly into the part of your mind that quietly runs your habits, your instincts, your automatic reactions to stress and opportunity alike. Most people fill this channel with static, worry about the day ahead, replaying arguments, reviewing every mistake in unnecessary detail. What if instead you use this exact channel deliberately? What if in those few minutes you spoke to yourself the way a mentor who genuinely believed in you would speak? Clearly, specifically, describing not the fear but the outcome, not the obstacle but the version of you who has already moved past it? This is not magic, it is maintenance. You are the only person who has unrestricted access to that channel every single day for the rest of your life, and what you choose to put through it consistently becomes the operating system running underneath every decision you make while you are not even thinking about it. Understand also that the world will not applaud you for changing. This is important because many people quietly delay their transformation while waiting for encouragement that will never fully arrive. Some people around you will be happy for you. Many will be indifferent, and a smaller number, closer to you than you would like to admit, will feel threatened by your growth, because your growth becomes a mirror reflecting back the choices they have not made in their own lives. This is not your responsibility to fix. You are not required to shrink yourself to keep other people comfortable with their own stagnation. You are allowed to outgrow rooms. You are allowed to outgrow conversations that once fit you perfectly and now feel like clothing from a decade you no longer belong to. Growth that never makes anyone uncomfortable is usually not growth at all. It is simply motion within the boundaries everyone already agreed you were allowed to have. There will come a day, if you commit to this the way it demands to be committed to, when someone will ask you how you did it, how you became someone so different from who you used to be, how your circumstances changed so completely, and you will not have an easy answer because there was no single dramatic event, no lucky break, no rescue that arrived from outside of you. There will only be the truth, unglamorous and completely available to anyone willing to pay its price. You decided, and then you kept deciding every single day in 1,000 small, unremarkable moments that nobody else was watching until the decisions accumulated into a life your old self would not recognize. That is the entire secret, not talent, not luck, not timing. Decision, repeated with discipline, defended against fear, aimed at a specific target, and refused to be abandoned no matter how many times it would have been easier to quit. Think for a moment about the compounding nature of small decisions, because this is where most people underestimate exactly how transformation actually happens. Nobody wakes up on a random Tuesday and suddenly possesses an entirely new life. That is not how any of this works, no matter how the highlight reels of other people's success might make it appear. What actually happens is quieter and slower and far less cinematic. It is the decision to wake up 30 minutes earlier, repeated for 90 consecutive days, until early mornings simply become who you are instead of something you are forcing yourself to endure. It is the decision to have one uncomfortable conversation you have been avoiding, which then makes the next uncomfortable conversation slightly easier, until eventually you become someone who no longer avoids difficulty as a default setting. It is the decision to finish one small project completely, instead of scattering your energy across a dozen half-started ideas, because finishing even something small teaches your mind that you are the kind of person who completes what they begin. None of these individual decisions look dramatic. None of them would make an impressive headline. But stacked on top of each other day after day, they compound in exactly the same way financial interest compounds, invisibly at first, and then seemingly all at once, undeniably. This is precisely why the earliest days of any transformation feel disproportionately difficult compared to the results they produce. You change a habit and nothing visible happens. You change another habit and still nothing visible happens. This is the period where most people quit, not because their plan was wrong, but because they misunderstood the shape of compounding. They expected a straight line and received instead a flat, frustrating plateau that seems to stretch on forever. What they did not realize is that the plateau is not evidence of failure. It is the necessary invisible accumulation phase that precedes every breakthrough that has ever looked sudden from the outside. The people who eventually broke through were not people who experienced a shorter plateau. They were simply people who kept making the same small decisions through the entire length of it, trusting a process they could not yet see any proof of, because they had made peace with the fact that proof arrives after commitment, never before it. So here is what I want you to do, starting today, not next month, not after you feel ready, not once conditions improve, today. Choose one decision, the one that matters most, the one that has been sitting quietly at the center of everything you have been avoiding, and make it completely, without a backup plan, without an escape route, without an anchored ship waiting just off the shore in case things do not work out. Speak to yourself deliberately, in the language of the person you are choosing to become, every single morning and every single night, until that language becomes more familiar to your mind than the old, smaller story ever was. Identify the specific fear that has been running your decisions from the shadows, name it honestly, and understand that naming it is the first step toward removing its invisible power over you. Choose, carefully and without guilt, who gets close enough to influence the fragile early stages of your new direction, and who needs to be loved from a respectful distance while you build. Get specific about exactly what you are building, so specific that you could describe it to a stranger in complete detail, because specificity is what separates an actual plan from a pleasant daydream. And when you fail, because you will fail, everyone who has ever built anything worthwhile has failed repeatedly along the way. Get back up one more time than the failure knocked you down, and keep building and keep deciding, and keep refusing to let any single setback write the final chapter of a story that is nowhere near finished. There is a version of this story where you close this out, feel inspired for an hour, and then quietly return to exactly the life you were living before you heard any of it. That version is available to you, and nobody will stop you from choosing it, because the old life never fights loudly. It simply waits patiently, knowing that inspiration without action fades faster than it arrived. But there is another version, the one where this exact moment becomes the line you point back to years from now, the moment everything shifted. Not because the words themselves were magic, but because you finally decided to let them mean something instead of letting them pass through you like every other piece of encouragement you have consumed and forgotten. Only you know, right now, which version you are choosing, not tomorrow, not once you feel ready. Now, in this exact moment, while the decision is still warm, while the old excuses have not yet had time to reorganize themselves into something that sounds reasonable again. The gap between the person who watches this and forgets it and the person who watches this and is never the same again is not talent, and it is not luck. It is simply whether you were willing, in this single instant, to stop considering and finally decide your old life is behind you, calling your name, familiar and comfortable and small. It knows exactly what to say to pull you back because it has known you the longest. But you do not have to answer, you do not have to turn around. Somewhere ahead of you, in a life you have not yet built but have always been capable of building, there is a version of you standing exactly where you want to end up, looking back at this exact moment, at this exact decision, as the single turning point where everything changed. That version of you is waiting, not patiently forever, but right now in this window, in this decision, in this refusal to let one more day pass exactly like the last 1,000 did. Force yourself to change, walk forward. Do not look back for permission that will never come from anyone but you. Your old life cannot follow you there. Only you can decide to leave it behind. And only you can decide, starting this very moment, to never go back.